Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a really dramatic and, let's be honest, pretty controversial story that's been making the rounds online. It comes from a single viral video, and it argues that the Iranian regime isn't just in trouble, but that it's in a full-blown state of collapse. So, we're going to walk through the exact claims and theories this one source presents, step by step. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. According to this report, it all starts on the night of January 10th. The claim is that a massive power cut hit Tehran. But this wasn't just some accident. The source argues it was a deliberate move by the government to try and suppress dissent, keep people locked down in their homes.
So you'd think a citywide blackout would keep people inside, right? Well, according to this report, it did the exact opposite. The move is said to have backfired, and in a huge way. Instead of staying home, the source claims a jaw-dropping 1.85 million people poured into the streets all across the country. A massive, massive show of defiance.
And right there in the total darkness of the capital, something really powerful happened. The video claims hundreds of thousands of people in Tehran's Punak Square all took out their cell phones and turned on the flashlights, creating this incredible sea of light. So what the source is arguing here is that this wasn't just a pretty picture, it was a huge psychological blow. It was the moment the regime's so-called empire of fear began to crumble. Now, here's where the narrative gets really interesting. How does this go from just a protest to something more? Well, the video argues this wasn't just random anger boiling over. It claims this was a coordinated effort, one that was being guided by a brand new and much more aggressive strategy. In this quote, it supposedly sums up the whole new game plan. The video presents these words from the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, and the source's interpretation is key here. This isn't just some friendly advice. It's being framed as a direct military order. The goal wasn't just to protest anymore. It was to take and hold territory. Okay, so the video breaks the strategy down into 3 really clear steps. First up, the shift from just showing up and leaving to actually occupying city centers permanently. Then, the second step is to establish what the source calls liberated zones, places like Punak that are completely free of government control. And finally, the third step, prepare those areas to be safe landing zones, presumably for Pahlavi's eventual return. But you gotta ask, what's making people take these huge risks? Well, the source has a very specific answer. Nostalgia. A really powerful, deep-seated longing for a past that's been lost. The video really hammers this point home by painting this stark contrast. On one hand, you've got this picture of a golden age before 1979, the Switzerland of the Middle East with a strong economy and social freedoms. And on the other, you have the reality today as the source sees it: poverty, corruption, and repression. The point the video is making is that this isn't just people being sentimental. It's about remembering something very real that was taken away. And get this, the source claims this feeling isn't just on the streets. It's supposedly coming from inside the regime itself. It points to this pretty shocking quote, which it attributes to the current president, Pezeshkian, and it's presented as a stunning admission from the very top that, economically at least, the revolution has been a failure.
All right, so this is where the story takes a turn into something that sounds almost like a political thriller. We get to the most complex and, frankly, the most explosive theory that the source presents: the idea that there's a secret pact to tear down the regime from the inside.
So this becomes the central question. Are we watching a messy, spontaneous revolution bubble up from the streets? Or is this a carefully managed, controlled demolition? The source leaves no doubt about where it stands. It's arguing this is a demolition planned from the inside out. And this is the centerpiece of the whole theory, something the video calls the grand bargain. Basically, the idea is that this is a two-pronged attack. You have an insider, Pezeshkian, who's allegedly working to gum up the works and paralyze the state. And at the same time, you have an outsider, Pahlavi, who's getting ready to step onto the stage. So how does the source back up this incredible claim? Well, it's all about connecting the dots. What the video does is it puts 2 things side by side. On one side, you have Pezeshkian publicly criticizing the regime. On the other, you have Pahlavi giving these strategic directives to his supporters. The takeaway they want you to have is, this is no coincidence. It's a plan in action. And in this telling, Pezeshkian gets cast as a kind of Gorbachev for Iran. So think about it like this. His supposed job isn't to be the guy out front with a megaphone. No, he's the guy on the inside, pulling wires, sowing confusion among security forces, and basically clearing a path for a new leadership to just walk right in. Okay, so this is the final piece of the puzzle, according to the source. All these different threads, the protests, the new strategy, the nostalgia, this grand bargain theory, they're all coming together, and they're creating a domino effect that's leading to what the video describes as a fast and totally inevitable collapse. The video then starts ticking off the signs, the writing it sees on the wall. It points to security forces stretched way too thin across 31 different provinces. It claims state services, like fire departments, are just not showing up to put out fires at government buildings. And then, and this is the big one, the source claims there are cracks showing up in the military itself, with reports of soldiers refusing orders. So, at its core, the argument is that this isn't just about politics anymore. It's about a complete change in how people think. The story the regime has been telling for decades, that the revolution saved them, well, the source says nobody's buying it anymore. Instead, the new belief is that the revolution ruined them. And so, the video's final conclusion is pretty stark. According to this one dramatic account, things in Iran have gone past the point of no return. The claim is bold, the endgame is here, and the final chapter for the current regime is being written on the streets. So there you have it. We've just walked through the entire narrative laid out in this one very specific source, a story of a planned collapse and a coming rebirth. It's a powerful and provocative claim for sure, and it leaves us all with one huge hanging question. If this account is what's really happening, what comes next? The source suggests the sun could be rising on a very, very different country. All right, let's dive into this. We're going to break down a pretty dramatic narrative from our source material, PPR Global. They're making a huge claim that we are literally watching the final days of the theocracy in Iran. It's a bold take, for sure, so let's unpack exactly how they build their case. Right out of the gate, the source material just drops this bomb. It's not mincing words. This framing is really important because it tells us we're not just talking about protests. We're talking about what they see as the definitive end of an era, a regime on the absolute brink of collapse. So where does this final chapter begin? According to our source, you can trace it all back to one specific night, January 10th. This single date is presented as the real flashpoint, the trigger that set off a chain reaction that they say is now unstoppable. The regime's plan that night? Well, it was something straight out of the authoritarian playbook. A massive citywide blackout. The source claims that by plunging major cities like Tehran into darkness, the goal was simple: create fear, cut off communication, and get people off the streets. But here's where things took a turn. The source says that plan completely, and I mean completely, backfired. Instead of scattering, people poured into the city squares. And to defy the darkness, they held up their cell phones, creating this incredible sea of light, a really powerful image of defiance. And this quote right here really gets to the heart of what the source is arguing. It wasn't just about lighting up the dark, it was a psychological win. It was the moment, they claim, that the people sent a clear message: we are not afraid of you anymore. And we're not talking about a small gathering here. The numbers cited are just massive. The source points to OSINT data, that's open source intelligence, basically info gathered from public stuff like social media, and claims over 1.85 million people hit the streets across Iran that night. They even suggest that number might have climbed to almost 4 million by midnight. Now, according to the source, this wasn't just a random, spontaneous event. The narrative they present puts the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi right at the center of it all, not just as a figurehead, but as an active commander who was directing things on the ground. Now check out this quote they attribute to Pahlavi. The source sees this as a massive pivot. The language here changes completely, right? It's not about protesting anymore, it's about conquest. The goal isn't just to be heard, it's to take and hold ground. So, okay, how does that big idea turn into an actual plan on the ground? Well, the source breaks it down into these 4 key steps. It's laid out as this very methodical strategy for seizing power, turn protest sites into military strongholds, establish permanent control, and then create the conditions for his own return to Iran. But just when you think you have the story figured out, it gets even more layered. The source argues the regime isn't just fighting a battle on the streets. They believe it's also being eaten alive from the inside, as part of what they call a grand bargain. And this quote from President Pezeshkian? Wow, this is what the source presents as the smoking gun. For a sitting president to say something so damning, comparing today unfavorably to the pre-revolutionary era, the source calls it a bullet fired from within.
It's an admission that just cuts the legs out from under the regime's entire narrative. This all feeds into this really fascinating theory the source calls controlled demolition. The idea is that this isn't just some random outburst from the president. It's part of a coordinated, quiet agreement with Pahlavi to basically paralyze the state from the inside and clear the path for a peaceful transfer of power.
And to really hammer this point home, the source uses a historical comparison that's pretty hard to ignore. They basically say, think of Pezeshkian as Iran's Gorbachev, the ultimate insider who helps dismantle the old system. And Pavlov is positioned to step in as the unifying national figure to lead whatever comes next.
So you have to ask, right? What is driving millions of people to risk everything? The source argues it all comes down to this incredibly powerful feeling, a deep, profound nostalgia for what they call a golden age, life before the 1979 revolution.
And this slide, it just lays it out in black and white according to the source. It's a tale of two Irans. On one side, you have this image of a prosperous, free, globally connected nation, and on the other, the reality of today, economic despair, isolation, and oppression. That contrast, they say, is the rocket fuel for this revolution.
The source really digs into how young Iranians are seeing images of this past online, a past of modern cafes, women skiing, vibrant art festivals. And seeing this, it creates this powerful, painful sense of a future that was literally stolen from them. It turns that nostalgia into a real revolutionary force. Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. How does this all lead to the endgame? The narrative that the source builds is that all these different pressures, the protest in the street, the dissent from within, this deep historical anger, are all converging into one final, unstoppable collapse. The source lays it out as this domino effect, where every move the regime makes just makes things worse for them. The blackout backfires. The wall of fear comes down. Their violent tactics only make people more determined. And then, with security forces stretched thin across the country, you start to see the final cracks appear, reports of soldiers actually siding with the protesters. And that brings us to the source's ultimate bottom line. It's over. The social contract is shattered. They argue that the people have finally conquered their fear, they've chosen a new leader in Pahlavi, and the break with the current regime is now total and complete. So, we've walked through this incredible story. One source's argument for how a 47-year-old theocracy finally meets its end. But that just leaves you with the biggest question of all, doesn't it? If this is the end of one thing, what does the beginning of the next chapter actually look like?